Admiral James Anderson stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiant, humanity's newest flagship. The massive vessel, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, represented the pinnacle of human engineering and determination. As the ship entered the Arcturus system, its fusion drives glowing like artificial stars, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Quite a view, isn't it? Captain Lisa Reed joined him, her weathered face reflecting the blue-white glow of the nearby gas giant. "Sometimes I still can't believe we built this," Anderson replied, his eyes tracing the sleek hull of the warship. "Our ancestors would have thought it pure fantasy." The Defiant represented the culmination of centuries of technological evolution. Its hull, composed of carbon nanotubes and ceramic metal composites, could withstand direct hits from energy weapons that would have vaporized the naval vessels of the past. Beneath that hull, antimatter reactors powered systems that defied the physics textbooks of previous centuries. What truly set the Defiant apart, however, was its neural network. The ship's eye, though not truly sentient, could process combat data and make tactical decisions at speeds no human could match. It worked in perfect harmony with its human crew, each complementing the other's strengths. "The Orion Confederation ships are holding position at the edge of the system," Reed reported. "Their flagship is broadcasting a request for communication." The Orions, humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and now their most formidable rival, had deployed their own impressive fleet. Their vessels, organic-looking and seemingly fluid in design, utilized technologies humans were still struggling to understand. "Let them wait," Anderson said, studying the tactical display. "I want to see how they react to our new shield configuration." The Defiant's defensive systems represented a quantum leap in protection. Rather than traditional energy shields, the ship projected a bubble of altered space-time that could deflect or absorb incoming fire by manipulating the fundamental forces of physics themselves. In the command center below, tactical officers monitored the alien fleet through a dizzying array of sensors. The ship's quantum computers processed terabytes of data per second, building predictive models of Orion battle strategies based on previous encounters. "They're scanning us," announced Lieutenant Mike Tanner from his station, "trying to get a read on our capabilities." "Let them look," Anderson said with a thin smile. "They won't understand what they're seeing." What the Orions couldn't know was that the Defiant wasn't just a warship. It was a testbed for technologies that would redefine humanity's place in the galaxy. Its molecular fabricators could create replacement parts from raw materials. Its medical bay could regrow limbs and organs, and its weapon systems could harness the power of artificial singularities. As the massive ship moved deeper into the system, a silent signal went out to the rest of the human fleet. 40 vessels of varying sizes, each representing a specialized role in the battle group. They moved in perfect coordination, their formations shifting like the murmuration of starlings, presenting an ever-changing profile to the alien observers. "Send a message to the Orion flagship," Anderson finally ordered. "Tell them we're ready to begin negotiations." As the communications officer complied, Anderson exchanged a knowing glance with Captain Reed. The Defiant wasn't just a vessel of war. It was the physical embodiment of humanity's message to the stars. "We are here, we are strong, and we are not to be trifled with." Dr. Thomas Wright moved through the corridors of the Naval Research Laboratory in Norfolk, his mind preoccupied with the morning's test results. Around him, teams of scientists and engineers worked on technologies that, while less fantastic than those of science fiction, were no less revolutionary. "The directed energy prototype exceeded expectations," reported his colleague, Dr. Anna Miller, falling into step beside him. 15 seconds of continuous fire at full power without overheating. "And the targeting system?" Wright asked, skimming through the data on his tablet. 98% accuracy at 50 kilometers, she replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "The adaptive optics are compensating for atmospheric distortion better than we anticipated." What they were discussing was the Navy's new laser defense system, a far cry from the destructive beams of science fiction, but formidable nonetheless, capable of tracking and disabling drones, missiles, and small craft. It represented a significant advancement in naval defense. In another wing of the facility, engineers were perfecting railgun technology. Using electromagnetic forces to propel projectiles at hypersonic speeds, these weapons could strike targets hundreds of kilometers away with devastating kinetic energy, all without the need for explosive warheads. "Commander Jackson wants to see you," Miller said as they reached the laboratory's central hub. "The AI integration team has hit another roadblock." The integration of artificial intelligence into naval systems represented perhaps the most significant shift in warship design since the transition from sail to steam. Modern vessels were becoming too complex for human crews to manage alone, necessitating AI assistance for everything from damage control to combat maneuvering. "The ethical constraints are causing decision latency," explained Commander Robert Jackson when Wright arrived at the AI lab. "The system hesitates when multiple civilians are present in a combat zone." "That's not a bug. That's a feature," Wright replied firmly. "I won't sign off on an AI that doesn't prioritize civilian safety." Elsewhere in the facility, teams worked on other technologies that would define the warships of tomorrow. Advanced materials that could self-heal when damaged, compact fusion reactors that could power a vessel for years without refueling, quantum communication systems immune to conventional jamming, and autonomous drones that could extend a ship's sensor and weapon range. The Chinese unveiled their new destroyer last week, Jackson mentioned as they reviewed the AI's performance metrics: completely electric drive, integrated energy systems for both propulsion and weapons. Wright nodded. The race to develop the next generation of naval technology wasn't just about military advantage. It was about setting the standards that would define maritime power for decades to come. Later that day, Wright stood aboard the U.S. Innovator, an experimental testbed vessel floating in the Chesapeake Bay. Unlike the gleaming warships of fiction, the Innovator was ugly, a patchwork of modules and systems grafted onto a conventional hull, constantly being reconfigured as new technologies were tested. "We're ready for the swarm test," announced Lieutenant Emma Parker, the ship's technical officer. Wright watched as the Innovator deploy a constellation of small, autonomous vessels, each about the size of a lifeboat, but packed with sensors and limited weaponry. These drones moved in coordinated patterns around the mothership, extending its effective sensor range and providing a distributed defense network. "This is the future," he murmured to himself. "Not just bigger ships, but smarter ones." As night fell over the bay, the silhouette of the Innovator was barely visible, its advanced materials absorbing radar, infrared, and even visual detection methods. Unlike the imposing warships of science fiction, the most effective real-world vessels might be those that never revealed their presence until it was too late. Admiral Paul Reeves faced the Congressional Committee with the practiced calm of a man who had navigated both typhoons and politics. The hearing room was packed, representatives from defense contractors, environmental organizations, and media outlets all eager to hear about the Navy's next-generation warship program. "Admiral, can you address the power requirements for these new vessels?" asked Congresswoman Diane Foster, peering over her glasses. "My constituents are concerned about the safety of having nuclear reactors in their ports. The new compact fusion systems don't pose the same risks as traditional fission reactors," Reeves explained. "They can't melt down, produce minimal waste, and can be rapidly shut down in an emergency." What Reeves didn't mention was the immense technical challenge of miniaturizing fusion reactors for naval use. Despite breakthroughs in high-temperature superconductors and plasma containment, the technology remained on the bleeding edge of feasibility. "And the environmental impact?" pressed another committee member. This was trickier territory. Modern warships, for all their advanced technology, still faced fundamental challenges. Their propulsion systems disrupted marine life, their sensor arrays interfered with whale and dolphin communication, and their hull coatings slowly leached chemicals into the oceans. "We're implementing biomimetic propulsion on all new designs," Reeves answered carefully. The system reduces acoustic signatures while minimizing disruption to marine ecosystems. After the hearing, Reeves met with his technical advisor, Dr. Laura Wilson, in a secure room beneath the Capitol. They didn't ask about the autonomous weapons systems, Wilson noted, relief evident in her voice. They will eventually, Reeves replied grimly, and we need a better answer than what we have now. The ethical implications of autonomous warships represented perhaps the most significant challenge facing naval planners. How much authority should be delegated to artificial intelligence? Who would be held accountable when automated systems made lethal decisions? How could safeguards prevent hacking or malfunction? Back at the Pentagon, Captain David Martinez led Reeves through the Fleet Integration Office, where scale models of proposed vessel designs lined the walls. We've reduced crew requirements by 60%, Martinez explained, pointing to a sleek destroyer model. But that creates its own problems. Fewer sailors means less redundancy when systems fail. And less political support, Reeves added. Congress likes creating jobs, not eliminating them. This was the paradox of modern naval development. Increasing automation was necessary for performance, but reduced the human element that had defined naval service for centuries. Later that week, Reeves visited a cybersecurity exercise where the Navy's best hackers attempted to penetrate the defenses of a simulated warship. They're in the navigation system, announced the exercise coordinator. Took them less than 4 hours. Reeves watched as the simulated ship's course was subtly altered, so subtly that in real life, it might not be noticed until the vessel ran aground or collided with another ship. A warship is only as strong as its weakest system, the coordinator explained, and every new technology we add creates new vulnerabilities. This was the reality that science fiction rarely addressed, the complex trade-offs between capability, reliability, vulnerability, and cost. The most advanced warship ever designed would be useless if a single critical component failed or if an adversary found an exploitable weakness. As Reeves left the exercise, his secure phone chimed with a message from naval intelligence, satellite imagery showing a new Chinese vessel under construction, its dimensions suggesting capabilities beyond what American analysts had predicted. The race never ends, he muttered to himself, knowing that tomorrow would bring new hearings, new challenges, and new decisions that would shape naval warfare for generations to come. The waters of the South China Sea churned beneath a storm-darkened sky as Lieutenant Grace Williams guided her vessel through the contested zone. But unlike naval officers of previous generations, Williams wasn't standing on a bridge or even inside a ship. She was seated in a command center 2,000 miles away, her hands resting on control surfaces that transmitted her movements to a vessel with no human crew. Contact approaching from bearing 045, reported her systems officer, Lieutenant Mark Davis. Profile matches a Type 093 submarine. The unmanned surface vessel, USV, under Williams' command, designated Pathfinder, was one of dozens patrolling international waters. Looking more like a sleek, wave-piercing trimaran than a traditional warship, the Pathfinder represented the vanguard of distributed naval power. Activating passive countermeasures, Williams ordered, her voice calm despite the tension. The confrontation playing out was emblematic of the new face of naval warfare. Rather than massive fleet engagements, modern conflicts involved constellations of smaller vessels, some crewed, many autonomous, working in coordinated networks to control vital maritime domains. Aboard the U.S. Constitution II, floating 200 miles from the unmanned vessel, Commander Jason Garcia monitored the situation from the Fleet Coordination Center. The massive ship, one of only 8 in its class, served as a mothership for dozens of autonomous vessels like the Pathfinder. The Chinese are testing our response protocols, Garcia observed as data streamed in from sensors scattered across thousands of square miles of ocean. But they're being careful not to cross any definitive lines. This was the nature of modern naval competition, a constant probing of boundaries and capabilities, rarely escalating to direct confrontation, but never truly peaceful. The revolution in naval warfare had been driven by three converging factors: the vulnerability of large vessels to precision weapons, the exponential growth in autonomous systems, and the prohibitive cost of traditional fleet expansion. Nations had adapted by developing distributed networks of smaller platforms that could be lost without catastrophic consequences. "We're tracking increased satellite coverage of our position," reported the Constitution's electronic warfare officer. "They're trying to get a clear picture of our deployment pattern." Garcia nodded, unsurprised. "Implement deception sequence Delta. Let's give them something interesting to look at." Across the fleet, autonomous decoys began subtly altering their emissions patterns, creating false signatures of vessels that didn't exist, while masking the presence of those that did. The electronic battlefield had become as important as the physical one. Meanwhile, beneath the waves, networked autonomous underwater vehicles patrolled silently. Some were as small as torpedoes, others as large as traditional submarines, but all were linked in a mesh network that could operate even if communication with command centers was severed. "The missile has landed," announced Lieutenant Frank Thompson, monitoring ecological sensors from the Maritime Environmental Response Center aboard the Constitution. "Appears to be a drill round. No warhead." This, too, was characteristic of modern naval dynamics. Demonstrations of capability that stopped just short of acts of war, carefully calibrated to send messages without triggering escalation. What none of the officers discussed openly was the presence of orbital assets, both surveillance platforms and weapon systems capable of striking from space. These systems, officially prohibited by international treaty but developed in secret by all major powers, represented the ultimate high ground in naval warfare. As the Pathfinder completed its mission and prepared to rendezvous with a resupply drone, Williams reflected on how naval power had evolved. The romantic image of warships as floating fortresses had given way to a more distributed, resilient, and adaptable concept, less visually impressive perhaps, but far more effective in projecting influence across contested waters. "Contact is withdrawing," Davis reported as the Chinese submarine turned away. "Looks like they've collected the data they came for." Williams nodded, knowing that somewhere, Chinese officers were engaged in the same dance, commanding their own unmanned vessels in this new form of maritime competition, one where victory was measured not in ships sunk or territories seized, but in information gathered and influence maintained. The Naval War College in Newport bustled with an unusual energy as officers from a dozen nations gathered for the International Maritime Security Symposium. At the center of attention was Admiral William Foster, recently retired from active service and now serving as a bridge between military tradition and technological revolution. "The concept of the warship as we've understood it for the past century is obsolete," Foster declared to the assembled officers, his voice echoing through the historic auditorium. "Not because ships themselves are obsolete, but because the very nature of maritime power has transformed." On display in the college's central hall was a holographic projection showing the evolution of naval vessels, from wooden ships of the line to ironclads, from dreadnoughts to aircraft carriers, and finally to the distributed systems that now dominated the seas. "Humanity's relationship with the ocean is changing," Foster continued. "As climate shifts alter coastlines and open new sea routes, as resources beneath the waves become more valuable, and as artificial islands reshape maritime boundaries, naval power must adapt not just in capability but in fundamental purpose." After the presentation, Foster walked with Captain Julia Martin, an up-and-coming officer who commanded one of the Navy's new adaptive task forces. "The old sailors don't like it," Martin admitted as they toured the college's Innovation Center. "They missed the days when a warship was something you could point to with pride." Foster smiled, understanding the sentiment. The romance of naval tradition had been built around vessels as physical embodiments of national power, massive, impressive, and crewed by sailors who formed deep bonds with their ships. The transition to distributed systems controlled remotely or autonomously had eroded that emotional connection. "But you can't argue with effectiveness," Foster replied. The Black Sea demonstration last year proved that conclusively. He was referring to an incident where a conventional destroyer had been effectively neutralized by a swarm of autonomous vessels at a fraction of the cost of the warship they had rendered useless. In the research wing of the college, civilian and military experts collaborated on predicting the next evolution in naval warfare. Some focused on developments at the molecular level, programmable materials that could change properties on demand, biological systems integrated with mechanical ones, or nanoscale fabrication that could repair damage in real time. Others looked to space as the ultimate high ground for maritime operations, developing concepts for orbital platforms that could monitor and, if necessary, intervene in nautical conflicts with unprecedented speed and precision. The true challenge isn't technological, observed Dr. Helen Parker, the college's chief futurist. It's institutional and cultural. How do we redefine naval tradition and identity in an age where warships might have no crew or might not even be recognizable as ships in the traditional sense? This was the question that military organizations worldwide were grappling with: how to maintain the ethos and culture of naval service when the nature of that service was transforming so fundamentally. As the symposium concluded, Foster found himself on the observation deck overlooking Narragansett Bay, watching a formation of autonomous patrol vessels practicing synchronized maneuvers. Beside him stood Admiral Takashi Yamamoto of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. "My grandfather served on a battleship," Yamamoto said quietly. "My father on a destroyer. I commanded an Aegis cruiser. And my daughter, she operates unmanned systems from a command center hundreds of miles from the sea. 4 generations, each with a completely different understanding of what it means to be a naval officer." Foster nodded, appreciating the perspective. And yet the fundamental mission remains unchanged: to secure the maritime commons, to protect commerce, to project influence, and when necessary, to fight and win at sea. As night fell over the bay, lights from the autonomous vessels created patterns on the water, a new kind of naval presence for a new era. Somewhere beyond the horizon, massive motherships served as hubs for these distributed systems, while beneath the waves, autonomous submarines patrolled silently. In orbit above, satellites kept watch over it all. "We still call them warships," Foster said finally, "even though they bear little resemblance to the vessels of the past. Perhaps because we understand that it's not the form that matters, but the function, to serve as the guardians of humanity's oldest highway, the sea." The transformation of naval warfare, like the ocean itself, would continue to evolve, sometimes in sudden, stormy shifts, sometimes in the slow, inexorable patterns of tide and current. But through it all, the essential relationship between humankind and the sea would remain, along with our determination to master it.